Hollywood sold the Old West as a land of heroes and adventure. The reality was brutal. Diseases with no cure, everyday violence and misery that few survived. Historians found records and images the studios never showed. These are 17 documented facts that reveal why most people didn't last a year in that world. Subscribe to our channel and comment where you're watching us from. Number 1. The water that killed in silence. You turn on the tap today without thinking twice, but in 1850, drinking a glass of water could be your last decision. Cholera showed up without warning and worked fast. A strong man would wake up fine, get cramps after lunch, and be dead before dinner. We're not talking days or weeks, hours, sometimes less than 12. The body lost fluids so fast that the skin turned bluish and wrinkled like old paper. Doctors back then had no idea the water was to blame. Miners out west drank straight from rivers where they dumped all kinds of filth. Whole towns shared the same water source contaminated with sewage. In San Francisco, cholera outbreaks swept through entire neighborhoods. The scariest part? Nobody understood why. Germ theory wouldn't come until decades later. Until then, dying of thirst or dying from dirty water were the two options on the table. Number 2. The duels that started out of nowhere. You've heard the Old West was violent, but the reality was even more absurd. In Dodge City during the 1870s, a man could die just for giving someone the wrong look in a saloon. It didn't take a serious insult or a robbery. All it took was a sideways glance, a word taken the wrong way after a few shots of whiskey, and the revolvers came out of their holsters. Records from the time show these places averaged about 1 death a week. Most shootouts didn't involve famous outlaws or brave sheriffs. They were regular workers, worn-out cowhands, and drunk gamblers settling their differences with bullets. Life was worth so little that many bodies weren't even identified before being buried. Number 3. The winter that killed in silence. Montana, 1880s. You think you've really been cold? Just wait until you hear this. Thermometers would drop to 40 below zero, and a lot of people didn't even have a thermometer to know it. They only felt their bodies slowly shutting down. The miners searching for gold and silver lived in thin canvas tents, the kind of shelter that could barely hold up against a summer rain. When winter came, those tents turned into deadly traps. Men would go to sleep and simply not wake up. Their companions would find the bodies stiff as stone in the morning. There were no hospitals, no rescue. If you couldn't get a fire going or find somewhere enclosed, your chances were basically zero. The dream of getting rich came at a steep price, and many paid with their own lives before finding even a single gram of gold. Number 4. Did you know that crossing the Old West was basically signing up to starve? Pioneers on the trails in the 1860s faced a brutal choice: eat spoiled food or eat nothing at all. The dried meat they carried was often contaminated, and fresh fruit was a non-existent luxury. The result? Scurvy on a massive scale. Gums would start bleeding, teeth would fall out, and many simply died of malnutrition halfway there. Historians estimate that hunger killed as many travelers as the dangers of the route itself. While today we complain about gas station food on road trips, those people prayed to find anything that wouldn't kill them. The promise of land in the West came with a price few ever imagined they'd have to pay. Number 5. Wyoming in the 1870s was grizzly territory. These animals could hit 400 kilos and weren't afraid of people, Records from the time show hunters would simply disappear in the mountains, and weeks later, someone would find only bones and a rusted rifle. The problem was simple. The guns back then would jam, fail at the worst moment, and you had at most 2 shots before you had to reload. An angry grizzly can cover 15 meters in under 2 seconds. Do the math. Wolves were another story. They traveled in packs of up to 20 and learned that lone humans were easy prey. There are settlers' diaries that describe staying up all night, hearing the howls getting closer and closer. The West wasn't just outlaws and shootouts. Nature took its toll on anyone who pushed too far from civilization. Number 6. For decades, history books only told one side of this war. But the truth is more complicated. When thousands of settlers started crossing the Great Plains in the 1860s, they were entering lands that had belonged to the Sioux, Cheyenne, and Comanche for generations. These tribes weren't savages for no reason. They were warriors defending their families, their buffalo, their way of life. The attacks were brutal. No one denies that. But on the other side, the U.S. Army didn't spare anyone either. Sand Creek, Washita, the names stuck. It was a war of extermination on both sides, and in the end, almost nothing was left of the way of life that had existed there for thousands of years. Number 7. San Francisco in the 1850s was basically no man's land. The police barely existed, and the courts took months to try any case. So a solution popped up that a lot of people thought was genius at the time: the vigilance committees. Regular citizens who decided who was guilty and who deserved the noose. The problem was, all it took was an accusation, and that was it. No lawyer, no real jury, no chance to defend yourself. A lot of men were hanged over personal grudges or just for being in the wrong place. A neighbor you fought with over a fence could show up the next day saying you stole something. And once the crowd was already gathered with a rope in hand, nobody stopped to check if it was true. Number 8. Colorado, 1870s. These men went down every single day into holes that could turn into their graves at any moment. 12 straight hours in the dark, breathing dust that wrecked your lungs in just a few years. It was brutal. The silver and gold mines pulled in desperate people from everywhere, promising quick fortune. Reality was different. The tunnels were dug on a wing and a prayer. No engineer, no real plan. When the support timbers gave out, there was no warning. Hundreds of workers died buried alive every year, and a lot of bodies were never recovered. Families didn't even have a place to grieve. Mine owners figured it was cheaper to lose men than to spend money on safety. A miner's life was worth less than the rocks he pulled out of the ground. Number 9. In 1880s Texas, drinking water could be a death sentence. It sounds like an exaggeration, but it isn't. Ranchers dug wells near the corrals without realizing they were creating deadly traps. Rain would wash cattle waste straight into the groundwater, and that crystal-clear water that looked clean carried typhoid bacteria. People drank it, cooked with it, gave it to their kids. Within weeks, entire families would start running high fevers and slipping into delirium. Towns would lose 10, 20 people at a time. Doctors back then didn't understand the link between the corral and the disease. They called it frontier fever and blamed bad air. Only decades later did science figure out that the same water keeping the cattle alive was killing their owners. Number 10. The famous Oregon Trail was way more dangerous than the movies make it look. Between 1840 and 1860, about 400,000 people tried to cross the United States in wagons. The problem was that nobody was truly prepared. Rivers were the biggest nightmare because there were no bridges. Families had to cross with everything they owned, and it only took a stronger current to flip a wagon. A lot of people drowned trying to make it to the other side. Ravines took their toll, too. A broken wheel on a steep downhill meant guaranteed disaster. Historians estimate that 1 in every 10 travelers didn't make it to their destination. Along the trail, it was common to see makeshift graves marking where someone was left behind. Number 11. In the 1870s and 1880s, syphilis spread through the Old West like wildfire through dry grass. Brothels in mining towns and railroad stops became the center of a silent epidemic. There was no penicillin back then. The antibiotic wouldn't arrive until 1943. The treatments available included mercury, which slowly poisoned the patient. An infected cowboy could go for years without serious symptoms, spreading the disease everywhere he went. When the final stage hit, the brain was attacked. Men who had once been strong lost their minds, became paralyzed, and died in makeshift asylums. Historians estimate that up to 15% of the adult population in certain towns carried the disease. The strange thing is that many doctors at the time didn't even know how to tell syphilis apart from other infections. It was a death sentence that nobody really understood. Number 12. The invisible killers of the Old West. Have you ever stopped to think that in the Old West, snakes and insects killed more people than the outlaws themselves? Yeah, partner. Reality was pretty different from the Hollywood movies. In 1880s, Arizona, a rattlesnake bite was basically a death sentence. There was no anti-venom, so cowboys tried everything: whiskey, tourniquets, even sucking the venom out with their mouths. Nothing really worked, and a lot of people died in agony in less than an hour. But snakes weren't even the biggest problem. Mosquitoes carried malaria and yellow fever, diseases that wiped out entire mining camps. A guy could survive shootouts and robberies, but get sick because of a tiny insect he never even saw coming. Doctors back then barely understood how those fevers spread, so people kept dying without knowing why. Number 13. Imagine getting sick and the nearest doctor being weeks away by horseback. That's how thousands of families lived in the Old West. On isolated farms in the 1860s, a simple cut could turn into a death sentence. With no antibiotics or hospitals, infections took over fast. Many farmers learned to do amputations at home, using a regular saw and whiskey as anesthesia. Women became the real doctors in these communities, knowing herbs and techniques passed down from generation to generation. Records show that about a third of settlers never saw a professional doctor in their entire lives. When a doctor did show up in the area, families would travel for days just for a minutes-long visit. It was a time when surviving depended more on luck and toughness than on any known treatment. Number 14. The flash floods that caught everyone off guard in the desert. A lot of people think the biggest danger in the Old West was a revolver bullet or a bandit attack, but there was something that killed without warning and gave you no chance to react. In 1870s New Mexico, settlers learned the hard way that desert doesn't mean dry land all year long. When summer rains hit the distant mountains, the water came down the canyons like a wall of liquid. The problem was, the sky over the camp could be completely clear. The men had no idea what was coming until they heard that roar. In a matter of minutes, a dry riverbed would turn into a violent current sweeping everything away. Wagons, horses, whole families. Survivors said there wasn't even time to scream. The desert kept this deadly secret that the maps back then simply didn't show. Number 15. In the Old West, taking a bath was almost a luxury. Most people went weeks, sometimes months, without really washing. Water was scarce and expensive in many towns, so people just lived with the dirt. The result? Lice were as common as dust in the streets. But the problem went way beyond itching. Skin infections spread fast, and without antibiotics, a simple infected cut could kill. Doctors back then already knew that lack of hygiene caused disease, but changing an entire population's habits was another story. Barbers often passed diseases from one customer to the next, using the same dirty blades. Hotels rented out beds that dozens of people had already used without changing the sheets. It was a world where strong smells were normal and nobody complained because everyone was in the same boat. Number 16. Traveling through the West in the 1870s was basically gambling with your life. Stagecoaches carried cash, gold, and passengers, perfect targets for gangs that knew every bend in the road. The scariest part? A lot of robbers were ex-soldiers from the Civil War, men trained in combat who now used those skills for crime. Transport companies lost so much money that they started hiring sharpshooters to escort the trips. Even so, the numbers are wild. Wells Fargo alone recorded more than 300 robberies in a decade. Some outlaws got so famous that newspapers back east printed their exploits like they were adventure stories. The truth was very different. Passengers were often left with nothing, sometimes not even the clothes on their backs, in hostile territory where nature finished the job the bandits started. Number 17. Picture this scene that looks peaceful but hides a brutal reality. These cowboys faced shifts of up to 18 hours a day on horseback during the big cattle drives in the 1860s. The human body just isn't built for that. Records from the time show that many of these men suffered heart collapses before turning 40. Some dropped dead right there on the trail and were buried where they fell with no ceremony at all. Ranch owners knew it was cheaper to hire another hand than to give proper rest. That was the cold math of the business. Movies show adventure and freedom, but never talk about broken bodies and quiet deaths. These facts come from historical archives that Hollywood chose to ignore because they don't fit the heroic myth. Like if you learned something new and share if you were shocked.